of the American.
Bill has been a frequent guest. He does great work for the center, and his current piece that compels us to ask Bill to come in is that we have a tape recording now, almost an hour long, of a meeting that Attorney General Keith Ellison held with people who almost universally in that meeting turned out to be food fraudsters, if they weren't already.
Right. So of the attendees, the visitors in Keith's office, two of them would later go on to be indicted.
Mm-hmm.
The others who were in the office have not been indicted, not been accused of any wrongdoing. But two of the people in the office, and including Salim Saeed, who was just convicted in this most recent trial.
He was Aimee's right-hand man.
He was the head, the co-owner of Safari Restaurant, the largest vendor to Feeding Our Future.
Right. Now, let's establish a timeline and attempt to understand why this is important. This meeting took place in December of 2021.
December 11th, 2021.
What had Keith been insisting on?
Well, after the scandal broke, and
Right.
we'll get through this timeline. So
Right.
the FBI raids, 200 federal agents, dozens of search warrants. January 20th, 2022. You were doing the weather there at the beginning. It was the coldest day of 2022, 15 below zero. They flew in all these FBI agents from around the country. I hope they brought their parkas with them. So they executed these search warrants. And then afterward,
That was
media,
in January of 2022.
January 2022, January 20th. So the FBI raids. And then after that, news media got interested in the story, started asking the governor, the head of Department of Education, Keith Ellison. And Keith Ellison's position has been that he was working hand in glove with the FBI the entire time. He gave a timeline of when he got involved in holding, in his words, holding Feeding Our Future accountable. And his timeline has his involvement September 2020.
Okay,
So
this is important. September of 2020, Keith, in response to the 2022 arrival of the troops, said, I've been working on this since September of 2020.
I've been working to hold Feeding Our Future accountable since September of 2020, working with the FBI. That's his claim after the fact.
Well, that's terribly crucial because now we get to December of 2021.
Right. So December 11th, he takes this meeting with the room. Everybody in the room is associated with Feeding Our Future in some way. Either they were employees or vendors. But two of his guests later on became defendants in the case.
What was the purpose of this meeting?
The purpose of this meeting was the airing of the grievances. So
The grievances about what?
Feeding Our Future was complaining to Keith about the Department of Education's clamping down on their operation.
Not getting the money fast enough or what they requested.
Or being shut down.
Being shut down.
This has been going on for more than a year and a half where the Department of Education had run hot and cold on this. That sometimes they just cut off the money, wouldn't pay another invoice, or they wouldn't approve an application, told them to go pound sand. And then they relented and started paying money again. But this was another crackdown. I guess the Department of Education knew these raids were coming and we're starting to put the squeeze on Feeding Our Future. So they go to Keith Ellison. Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, by statute represents the state agencies, Department of Education, all the other state agencies in litigation. And Feeding Our Future for more than a year had been suing the Department of Education in state court. To some,
which is an amazing. It's amazing when you stop to think about it. They're basically suing them to continue their fraudulent.
Right. So they made all kinds of fraudulent, false accusations. Perjuring themselves in state court, saying, "Hey, we're innocent, just hardworking business people. Call off the dogs." And so that was the purpose of the meeting. Feeding Our Future sent representatives to Keith Ellison saying, "You're the lawyer for the Department of Education. Call off the dogs. Quit going after us."
Well, if he said he's been working on the fraud since 2020, didn't he have to know that the people present in his office were involved in the fraudulent behavior?
Well, once they described who they were and started throwing around the name Feeding Our Future, that should have been the red flag that it would have ended the meeting.
Why didn't he say, "I'm not meeting with you people. I've been trying to get to the bottom of your actions for more than a year now. And here you are in my office. How dare you? You should be leaving my office. That would be a reasonable.
And totally appropriate as the lawyer for the Department of Education. Instead, you hear him on the tape saying on 2 different occasions, well, I'm hearing this for the first time.
Oh.
This is the first time I'm hearing of this.
You just got a foghorn for appropriate, but you don't have to foghorn.
Okay.
Right. Bill, well, that's crucial then. This timeline has to be is terribly crucial. In September of 2020, the food fraud was known about.
Well, they've known about the food fraud at the Department of Education since it began in April of 2020. So they knew from day one that these guys weren't legitimate.
And by September of 2020, the Attorney General of the state says, I'm on it.
Right,
I'm working on this. And I got this.
That was about the time frame where Feeding Our Future was threatening a lawsuit. They hadn't filed one yet, but the fall of 2020, they were sending threatening letters to the Department of Education saying, if you don't relent and let our people participate in these programs, we're going to sue you.
When did the Department of Education head Heather Mueller conveniently decide to leave?
I don't
right in this time frame.
I don't have that in front of me. So, but around this time frame. So she was long gone by the time the FBI raids occurred.
Okay, this is fascinating to me for this reason. As this fraud has played out, I have developed a growing suspicion that if it was not aided and abetted by people inside the state capitol, it's certainly been, the people inside the state capitol were entirely aware of it, that they enthusiastically gave money to nonprofits. We can debate the reasons why they might have done that, but they were in on it in the sense that it's not possible, in my estimation, to lose $250 million without somebody in roles of importance really knowing about it. They gave them the money, and probably their protection in the legal world would be, well, we gave them the money legally. If they got caught, that's their problem.
November of 22.
November of 22 is when Heather left.
Yes.
All right. Maybe we'll leave Heather out of this if nobody has any suspicions about Heather, but I do.
And she had been there since March 9th of 2021.
Right.
So about a year.
Back to the timeline. September of 2020, Keith is saying, I'm on this. I'm very aware of this. December of 2021, more than a year later, he's meeting with, how many people were in on the meeting, Bill?
It's hard to tell.
We all in this state, we just call people by their numbers. So, number 63 was in there, and
number 63 was in there, and number 3 was in there. So number 3 and number 63 were in there, and there were probably 4 or 5 others. I'm not sure everybody in the room spoke, but from my count, there are probably 5 or 6, 7 different people who speak on the tape.
Do you think Keith was aware that he was being taped?
I would think not. Based on what he said out loud, I'm guessing he had no clue or didn't occur to him in the moment that it was being recorded.
And what he was saying out loud was what?
Well, he brags early on about how, and not on the food part, but he brags early on about how he had gone to bat for minority businesses in the child care industry who were being persecuted by a different state agency.
Also ripe with fraud.
Jody Harpstead. So Jody Harpstead was the Commissioner of Human Services, and he bragged about how he had intervened with Jody Harpstead and the commission to stop or slow down their investigations of the fraudulent
quit hassling
childcare.
My people here.
Right, exactly.
Quit bothering these small businesses out there.
Yes, and he bragged about how he was able to either put that to a stop or slow it down on behalf of his constituents, because a couple of the people in the room sitting in front of him were from the child care industry. So number 63 was her primary line of business, was running child cares. And so that's early on where
That's
before they get into
Ikram
the food.
Muhammad.
Correct.
That's number 63. She is Ikram Muhammad.
Yes.
Right.
And she's in the room, and in fact, she's one of the first voices you hear on the recording, and you hear her frequently. She talks about how she works in the childcare industry, and that puts Ellison in the mood to brag about how he's been able to represent his constituents in the East African business community and get the Department of Human Services to stop clamping down so hard on the childcare stuff, persecuting them and he agrees with the premise that Department of Education, Department of Human Services are racist organizations discriminating against these small businesses.
Are you offering snippets of the tape on the center of the American
Yeah,
website?
so,
why don't you go to that and we'll play snippets or two.
So if you look at my piece,
I got it in front of me.
I embed in my online piece 4 snippets from the meeting. So some of them are kind of long, but most of the 3 of the 4 have mostly Keith speaking.
How did you become aware that there was a tape?
Yeah, it's very interesting. The public, and me included, became aware of the existence of this tape in very late January of this year, when the attorney for Aimee Bock, who was about to go on trial,
Right.
The attorney filed his exhibit list. These are the pieces of evidence that he may introduce into the trial. All the lawyers have to do full disclosure. Nobody wants for surprises in the courtroom. So he publishes a list of more than 1,000 items that he may introduce as evidence.
This is my pile of stuff I have.
Right. So
And
he had,
there was the tape.
and in there is the tape. It's item 710 out of 1,020 or 1,030. It's item 710, and it clearly says on it, Keith Ellison audio,
Yep.
12/11/2021. So everybody was kind of waiting around to see if this thing would be introduced in court. And, the trial went on for 6 weeks. And then the defense is the last thing to happen. And Aimee Bock takes the stand and she testifies for 3 or 4 days. And but the tape never comes up. It's never mentioned during the trial. And so
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I
Was maybe nothing on it that could have helped her?
Well, they think it would have helped her by showing, hey, the state knew about the fraud. They knew they knew about what we were doing. So in the tape, that the 12/11 tape, you can hear the Feeding Our Future people lay out their entire operation, their view how legitimate it is. Oh, we're really feeding, I think they used the word 150,000 children a day. We're feeding 150,000 children a day, but here's the Department of Education, won't pay our invoices. They're trying to put us out of business because they're racist. And they were hoping to convince Keith Ellison of their cause being just, and apparently they succeeded.
Well, by that point, they must have enjoyed tremendously the bounty that was coming in, to the point where they were willing to pretend that it was all real in order to keep getting it.
Yeah, at this point, they probably had gotten 240 out of the 250 million that they eventually got.
Now they're greedy.
Right, and so it had always worked.
That's terribly
It had always
bold.
worked.
Can you? Do we know what snippet you're going to play?
I'll play these in order if that's the way you'd like.
Well, and then Bill can tell us what we're hearing.
This is the 8-minute mark when Ellison offers his initial thoughts on the meeting's introductory remarks.
Yeah, so this is where they've had their introductions, and Keith is bragging about how he's gone to bat for the child care people with the Department of Human Services, showing examples of how he can help the people in front of him.
I'm very concerned about it. I don't run the agencies.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But let me just finish by saying, but often the agencies call on my lawyers to represent them. And so it's good that we're talking, because we've been in a series of conversations with Jody Harpstead as late as a week ago.
She's the DHS
on
commissioner.
how you cannot crunch down on these, because here's the thing, is as big as you are collectively, most are pretty small. And you're running small, tiny businesses out of business over nothing. And a lot of times, if you think there's a problem, I mean, look, everybody has to comply with what the rules are. But if somebody submits something that's not in the right format, then you call them and say, this is not in the right format. Not you're out. you're done, your contracts are over. And so this has my attention. I'm extremely frustrated by it, but we are in the middle of a battle with the agencies now. And I can tell you this, Walls agrees with me that this piddly, stupid stuff running small people out of business is terrible. But it's the problem of like, it's the problem of, you know, it's the classic problem.
He's writing on a whiteboard.
If
right now.
he's here and this guy here is giving these businesses a hard time, this guy, these folks somehow say, hey, they're picking on me. And he's like, oh, us? No, we're not. And so it's this back and forth.
What I'm gathering is that both Walls and Ellison apparently were in concert to agree that let's not disrupt these small child care centers.
That seems
Is
to be
that
the
a fair-
implication. Oh, I think that's a fair. Whether Walls
Well,
would agree
even
with
though
it.
they might have been doing terrible illegal things, not only collecting money illegally, but not maintaining the child care center the way they should have or whatever. And instead, this is coming off as, well, quit picking on those people. Is
Well,
that fair?
It's what's even more bizarre about this is we're talking timeline. So this is December 2021. The big child care scandal happened 2 years before. He has a unit within the Attorney General's office called the Medicaid Fraud Unit. They were prosecuting child cares and other people ripping off the state. So he's got people down the hall who are prosecuting these people. And then he's telling this group, this audience in front of him, well, we think these departments are putting people out of business on paperwork violations or very minor stuff, and they're discriminating on the basis of race. And you know, he needs to talk to his own folks because there are people who have gone to jail through state prosecutions that he's saying, well, those were unjust.
We're speaking with